some of the things that really affect people in communities are not that one speech act that is a clear death threat or a thing that on its own excludes people from participation. It's often the thousand cuts. It's often the small thing that on its own is just an unpleasant interaction, but when you see it a dozen times or 100 times, it makes it really, really hard for you to be visible online. We're seeing a range of behaviour online, and some of it is across the really pointy end of the pyramid of harm and crosses the line for incitement of hate and discrimination. And we have a few things to say about the current law. One is that it exists. So this is not a new area for regulation that compromises free expression. This is an area where there already is criminal and civil liability. But the current law is framed in some ways that sound quite archaic, that are vague in a way where it's a bit hard to understand how broad the standard is, and that have been very limited in the kinds of harm that they address. So the current law only addresses incitement of hate on the grounds of national origin, ethnicity, and race, I think. The reforms put that intervention on a more principled and principled basis that includes other potential grounds of discrimination. Religion, gender identity. There's discussion of expanding it to other grounds protected by the Human Rights Act. And there's also a look at upholding, bolstering the laws we already have around preventing discrimination. So if you, in the context of employment or accommodation or other protected areas under the Human Rights Act, we're not allowed to discriminate against people based on their sex, their sexuality, their gender identity, their ethnic identity. And should we let people stir up those attitudes, given that we've already committed to protecting against that kind of discrimination? Under the existing laws and under the proposals, there's a threshold that has to be met. And in many ways what's proposed is actually to raise that threshold for what counts as incitement. It's not any speech act which expresses hate, and this is where I think people can get confused. So the word hate is in there, but it's not really about what's in the mind of the person saying it. It's about the impact on the people it affects. Another framework that we think is really useful to apply is the idea of dangerous speech. This is from a group called the Dangerous Speech Project, and compared with the hate speech standard, where it's sort of on-off. If you meet the threshold, it's hate speech, and if you don't, it's not. The dangerous speech framework works like a fire risk gauge. You know those things you see driving through the countryside? And it looks not just at what's said, but at the context in terms of who's the audience? Who's speaking? What's the background context for that particular message? And just like if you throw a glass bottle out of your car and it's cold and it's been raining and it's windy, the risk of that is low. But if it's dry, if it's an area of scrub, if you've been in drought for a long time, the risk is that that glass bottle with the sunlight through it could cause a fire. So that's the kind of risk framework that the dangerous speech analysis offers.
There's lots of hate speech that isn't dangerous. It's ugly, it's offensive, it's hurtful, but it isn't dangerous in the sense that it doesn't increase the risk that people will condone or commit violence. There's also dangerous speech that isn't hateful at all. At the same time, the fact that this category is specific and narrow can help us to protect freedom of expression even while preventing hateful and violent discourse.
We think it's a useful way to situate particular expression, particularly online, where any one thing that a person says is sitting alongside lots of things that other people are saying, is speaking to particular audiences. The person who says sticks and stones will break my bones and names will never hurt me is trying to protect themselves from the hurt that they're feeling. Now, none of that is to say that this is easy to intervene on. How do we get evidence about another person's emotional state and the impact on that? It's hard. It's something that the Harmful Digital Communications Act grapples with, where to fit under there, a communication must cause serious emotional distress. And that people were worried about that as an impact on free expression, but you've also got to look at what the consequences are. When we're talking about people who are daily facing abuse and harassment online, that makes their lives hard, that's probably something that most people in Aotearoa wouldn't be aware of. And when we're talking about the real pointy end of addressing hateful and harmful material, that's probably not the first thing you go to when you're told that something is a debate about free expression. We have a really strong norm in our media and in our government institutions of thinking about things on the assumption that people are engaging in good faith, that some people have their way of life and beliefs and other people have their way of life and beliefs, and we disagree. And we need to navigate that in a pluralist society. And that's the case for most people, but there's also a few, an extreme fringe group, who are interested in attacking that basis of civil disagreement, in undermining trust in shared institutions like elections. And the normal conversations around a marketplace of ideas or free expression, I don't think they're built for a world where you have within your society groups of people who are seeking to overturn the basis of that shared conversation. Our institutions are really conservative about trying to protect free expression and operate within the bounds of liberal pluralistic democracy and intervene on harms in ways that are consistent with that. There's a lot of people voicing concerns at the moment about overreach and government doing too much and overstepping those bounds. That's not what I see. It's institutions that are trying really, really hard to work within those bounds. And at the same time, almost as if it's in a different world, there's people in communities who daily, weekly, are navigating the trauma of big catastrophic events like the terrorist attacks on Christchurch mosques, and daily insults and bullying and harassment that make it hard to be in public space, online and offline. What we don't have is a unifying front door or institution to bring all these things together. So before the internet, these would have been different channels delivering content by different media. You're getting it on your TV, your radio, and your newspaper. And now to a large extent, this is all unified, delivered over internet protocol, and amplified through big online services. A lot of how people in Aotearoa access and see and comment on the news is because it's popped up in their social media feed on the social media services they use. And we don't have a domestic Aotearoa appropriate forum to have a conversation about those things, to report across the board on concerns that come up, to think about what we actually want and what's in our interests.